action with the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, that is, introduced emission taxes, launched national CO2 emissions trading schemes. Consumers and investors are making new demands and driving businesses to change. What is energy
Ladies and gentlemen,
transition,
we're starting
and
in
how does it
exactly 1
affect
minute.
regions and businesses in Russia and other resource-producing countries? What is the future of oil, coal, gas, and electricity? How do traditional industry actors maintain their competitive positions? Students will get answers to these questions from leading experts and industry representatives in a convenient online format. 4 modules with lectures, online sessions, and interactive tasks. The effective presence thanks to the virtual educational classroom and a convenient personal account in the Canvas learning management system. For corporate executives and public authorities involved in risk management, strategic and investment decision-making process, and export-oriented industries. The program completion certificate will be provided. For more information about the program, please scan the QR code.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Dear friends, dear participants to our Deep Decarbonization Project session, online session in the framework of SKOLKOVO Low Carbon Dialogue, Oil and Gas Industry Decarbonization Sector. So we are about to start our session on Deep Decarbonization Projects, hydrogen and CCUS, carbon capture, usage and storage. Our session is the only one that is not in our classroom. So you're going to experience a bit less of a picture and more of content, hopefully, because we're having quite a bright panel of speakers with us today. We have people joining us from Paris and London and Tokyo, and I'm going to introduce you to all of them. We have a fantastic panel. So let me first introduce to you Mr. Zira Tanaka, Associate General Manager at International Affairs Department at Japan CCS. Good day, Tanaka-san. I also would like to introduce you to Mr. Artyom Karapetov, Schlumberger Russia and Central Asia Commercial Director. Hello, Artyom. We have with us today Mr. Nigel Janvey, Global Head of Carbon Management from Gaffney, Klein and Associates. We also have with us today Ms. Anna Karolko from Norway, representing Equinor, Low Carbon Technology Lead, Equinor SA. Hello, Anna. Mr. Bruno Silhan, Vice President on Carbon Capture, Utilization and Storage from Total. Mr. Dmitry Akimov, Director for Alternative Energy and Offshore Projects at Novatek, the only representative of a Russian company with us today. We also have with us today Ms. Margareta Klesser, Vice President of Carbon Management and Hydrogen from Wintershall Dea. Hello, Margareta. And last but not least, Mr. Professor Jonathan Stern, Professor Distinguished Research Fellow from Oxford Institute for Energy Studies. Good day, Professor Stern. Right, so we only have 1 hour and a half at our disposal and we have loads of things to discuss. So let us begin. I'd like to give the floor to each of the speakers and comment briefly on the points of interest. We don't expect you to use any slides, just share with us your opinion on hydrogen and CCUS. By way of introduction, I'd like to point out that in the survey that we issued yesterday on decarbonization in oil and gas sector, we had it in Russian and in English, we mentioned that both hydrogen and CCUS are global trends for oil and gas sector in terms of deep decarbonization that have huge growth potential. CCUS may amount to 1.4 gigatons by the year 2050. So volume-wise, it could be comparable with the oil industry of today. So it's from zero to that impressive value. And also hydrogen currently is not being actively used, but up to 14% of energy generation could come from the use of hydrogen. So hydrogen as energy carrier would grow, and it would be equaling the total of aqua energy, nuclear energy, wind energy, solar energy. So the role and position of oil and gas sector in this energy is something that we're going to discuss today, including technical risk and other risks. Tanaka-san, the floor is now yours. Please say a few words about the interesting demonstration project at Hokkaido Island. It's actually so close to my the place where I'm from Sakhalin, so it would be great to hear from you. Tanaka-san?
Good afternoon, and thank you for the introduction, Dr. Melnikov, and the opportunity to speak at SKOLKOVO Low Carbon Dialogue. So my name is Jiro Tanaka with Japan CCS, a private company established in 2008 to conduct CCS projects funded by the Japanese government. Japan CCS operates the Tomakomai CCS demonstration project, which is a cornerstone of Japan's efforts in CCS technology development, which I will talk about today. The project is located on Hokkaido Island, the northernmost of the 4 islands comprising the Japanese archipelago, in the city of Tomakomai, a large industrial port with a population of 170,000. The project comprises Japan's first large-scale full-chain CCS system from CO2 capture to storage. The CO2 source is a hydrogen production unit of an adjacent refinery, providing a gas stream containing approximately 50% CO2, which is brought to our facilities where the CO2 is captured, compressed, and injected. A unique feature of this project is that the CO2 is injected by 2 directional wells drilled from onshore to offshore, targeting 2 subseabed reservoirs. The injection wells have horizontal reaches of 3 kilometers and 4 kilometers. Actually, the configuration is similar to the Sakhalin 1 project, where extended reach wells target the Chaivo field, except that the gas is flowing from onshore to offshore. The injection scheme saved drilling and operating costs and avoided disturbing the harbor operations and fishing activities. An extensive monitoring system was installed for observation of the CO2 behavior in the reservoirs, microseismicity, and natural earthquakes. CO2 injection was started in April 2016, and the objective was to inject an average of 100,000 tons over 3 years, targeting 300,000 tons cumulative injection. This was successfully achieved in November 2019, and injection was suspended. Monitoring operations are being continued. Regarding the key achievements of the project, through the successful operation of the full-chain CCS system, we demonstrated its safety and reliability. Another achievement was the safe storage of CO2, which has been confirmed by our monitoring system and seismic surveys, which indicate that the stored CO2 has remained within a limited area around the injection point. It is this achievement that I would like to highlight, because the safety and security of CO2 storage at the Tomakomai storage site was actually seriously tested by the occurrence of a major earthquake. Large earthquakes are commonplace in Japan, and in 2018, a magnitude 6.6 earthquake occurred in a tectonically active area only 30 kilometers from the injection site. The earthquake caused massive destruction in a village close to the epicenter, but the Tomakomai facilities incurred no damage. Our reservoir pressure and temperature data indicated that the earthquake had no effect on the stored CO2. An expert review meeting confirmed this, but they also concluded that there is no relationship between the CO2 injection and the earthquake, that it was inconceivable that the CO2 injection had caused the earthquake. A common concern regarding CO2 is whether it is safe, and through our experience, we were able to establish that CCS can be safely conducted even under adverse conditions. We believe that sharing our experience will expand the feasibility of CCUS in countries with issues such as frequent earthquakes, storage sites situated near densely populated areas, and public opposition to CCUS. Looking a little ahead, the Japanese government is considering the effective use of the Tomakomai CCS facilities to demonstrate carbon recycling technology, such as the manufacture of methanol from CO2 and hydrogen, and to realize a hybrid system of CCS and CCU, the use of CO2 as a resource. Another project being considered is a CO2 ship transport demonstration project. In Japan, CO2 ship transport is likely to become the main means of transportation for CCS in view of the distances between CO2 emission sources and potential storage sites. So the government is considering a CO2 ship transport demonstration project connecting an emission source with Tomakomai, which is a proven storage site. This concludes my speech. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tanaka. Especially thank you for being so precise in time management. And thank you very much for joining us today, despite the fact that it's late Friday night. Hopefully, you'll still be with us for the whole 1.5 hours, and we'll be happy to give you the forum. And we actually mentioned it in our social media. We made a 2-minute video available in our social networks, and 700 people already watched it. So most probably not all Russian professionals know that something of this scale and importance happens right next to the borders of the Russian Federation. So we're going to raise the awareness even further. And I'm now giving the floor to Mr. Artem Karapetov. So Mr. Tanaka is saying that technical risks of CCUS technologies are quite manageable. So in this respect, what is the ground for commercialization of this kind of technologies to go from demonstration to commercial implementation? Thank you, Yuri. Thank you for this introduction and wonderful presentation by Mr. Tanaka. Thank you very much. Well, first and foremost, ladies and gentlemen, let me thank you for the opportunity to take part in discussing this interesting and highly relevant topic for Russian and global oil and gas industry. This morning, we had discussions that in order to meet the Paris country goals related to limiting global warming to well below 2 degrees centigrade, in order to achieve that, we need to look at several areas, this being increasing energy efficiency, the use of renewables, with each of them introducing around 35% plus minus 2% into our goals, and also CCUS. The role of CCUS in this total equation would amount to around 13%. So you cannot go without CCUS if you want to meet the Paris goals. So from the point of view of Schlumberger company, we already have major experience in realizing projects in carbon capture and storage and usage. We realized over 60 such projects. Some of these projects, equal portions are in the process of working through it. 60 projects have already been realized and 60 more are in the pipeline. So we're seeing great interest to these technologies. This technology is in fact around 20 years old, but we have a renewed interest to this topic. And if not exponential growth, then at least active growth and interest to this project. And we're expecting this trend to persist for several years. Let's start with the technology and then we'll go on with discussing the commercial side of it. So the technology part of it. We have a definite understanding of the technical cycle and the risks pertaining to planning and realization of projects and capturing, usage and storage of CO2. The key tasks that we are resolving is appraisal and of finding the reservoirs where CO2 can be stored for a while without having any risk of CO2 leaking to other parts of our underground areas. I also would like to point out that we have realized appraisal of around 100 reservoirs all over the world. So we have a vast understanding of what can be done and how to identify the reservoirs that would be good enough to store CO2. Next question is the question of transportation and obviously compressing, where one of obvious leaders in well construction, Sakhalin project has been mentioned by the previous speaker, and we're very active there. So we can construct wells of any kind of complexity and also in view of special requirements that are put forward towards the equipment to be used in constructing this kind of wells to inject CO2. Another important factor here is obviously subsequent monitoring. Let me reiterate why this is important. In terms of regulation, the constant continuous monitoring requirement amounts to 10 years after injection. 10 years post injection, you have to carry out monitoring and almost all the way to abandonment. So you obviously have to bear this in mind. Another important issue, closer to the economic side, what is the CO2 that we capture and inject? Its purity actually predetermines the deployment of this or that project and is oftentimes a hurdle, an economic hurdle to realizing these projects in certain industries at least. An interesting thing is that while we're an oil service company, Schlumberger's company has not just oil and gas related projects. More than 20 projects in our portfolio are not related to oil and gas at all. I'd like to point out specifically that be that oil and gas or not oil and gas, importantly, we look at integration. We have participated in more than 15 projects where we're involved not just in reservoir appraisal, but also in going all the way to investment solutions. So in terms of technical side of the things, we have clear understanding as well as the break-even points. We now have interesting commercial models that we develop jointly with our partners that are applicable for various parts of the CO2 chain. The initial starting point for projects of this kind are regulatory requirements. We can see it in Europe, in North America, in Australia, and other countries, and obviously economic stimuli that make it more interesting to be involved in CCS rather than pay fines for emissions. The questions pending are whether or not it is possible to create hubs for several players. Theoretically, this could have a very positive impact on the economics of the project, especially in situations when you have to additionally purify your CO2 and create additional infrastructure for this project. One other thing to be mentioned here. In the first half of the day, we mentioned partnerships over and over again. We can see in our projects that cross-industrial partnership is one of the critical things. For these commercial projects to be beneficial, mutually beneficial to all stakeholders of the process, well, this is very important. A lot of our projects, like I said, are not related to oil and gas, and let me give you an example. Very recently, we announced a joint projects with Chevron and Microsoft in California. This particular project is involved in agricultural sector, the waste are used to get electric energy. Unfortunately, it creates CO2 emissions too. So one of the solutions is to utilize waste and get energy out of those waste, and by waste I mean agricultural waste, and then we capture the CO2 that we get from producing energy from waste, and we subsequently store the CO2, and this is the way to provide uh, the residents of the area with clean energy. So to summarize the 3 points that I see, importantly, we have to have regulatory support and governmental support, proven technologies, as described by myself and the previous speaker, and obviously the expertise in those, as well as cross-industrial partnerships, where oil and gas center can be the tech leader or at the tech leader for other industries of the economy that are seeing the targets of decreasing their carbon footprint. CCUS is a way forward for this. And back to you, Yuri. Thank you very much, Artyom. This was a very insightful content. Thank you for summary that you provided in the end of your intervention, and we're going to address those later. And now I'm giving the floor to Nigel. Mr. Janwi, could you please say a few words about your main conclusions in CCUS deployment at scale in the US? To which extent you think it's realistic to increase its sizes 200 times, judging by the survey that we just issued? Yeah, go ahead, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Melnikov. Many thanks to the Moscow School of Management and the event sponsors. It's my pleasure to join the other distinguished panel members today virtually. My name is Nigel Genvi and I'm Global Head of Carbon Management at Gaffney Klein, located in Houston, Texas. Gaffney Klein is an international petroleum and energy consultancy with an office in Moscow that has been operating worldwide for nearly 60 years. The carbon management practice aim is to continue to de-risk energy investments through the energy transition. Gaffney Klein, we've gained considerable experience with in CCUS consultancy advisory projects and technology assessments worldwide. Now over 70 different project, technology and market assessments over the last 2 decades, including assignments for some of the key players. My own experience in CCUS comes from major oil and gas companies, dates back to 2004, and I've now worked on 27 different actual CCUS projects around the world, many of which have been involved with oil and gas operations, including hydrogen production, along with technology, policy, regulatory, and capability development. Now, over the last few years, there's been some fundamental changes going on regarding CCUS. CCUS is not just a technology for fossil fuels. It is not just a technology for power generation. It is a versatile low carbon energy technology that underpins the energy transition. CCUS is on the brink of moving from demonstration to deployment in many places around the world. It is commercially proven and available, and one project can deliver large-scale greenhouse gas emissions reductions. Now, a little over a year ago, I was alternate chair for the coordinating subcommittee of the United States National Petroleum Council study on CCUS, which was completed in December 2019 and was the result of the contribution of well over 300 participants from a wide range of different organizations. This report is available publicly at dualchallenge.npc.org. The initiation of this pivotal study goes back to late 2017, when the US Energy Secretary made a request of the NPC. He sought the Council's advice on the actions needed for both project development and technology pathways to deploy CCUS at scale in the United States. As you know, the US is in a very good place regarding CCUS. It has already around 2/3 of the world's current capacity, 25 million tons per annum. Around 85% of the global CO2 pipeline infrastructure, well-funded and executed R&D underway, with the Department of Energy having invested around $4.5 billion over the last 20 years, and also the beginnings of a meaningful public policy and regulatory infrastructure. So you may ask, what else is needed? The conclusions from the NPC study found CCUS deployment at scale will mean moving from 25 to 500 million tons per annum of CCUS capacity. Infrastructure build-out equivalent of 13 million barrels per day of capacity, about 75% of current US oil and gas capacity, volumetrically. Incremental investment of $680 billion, and support, importantly, for 236,000 US jobs and a GDP of $21 billion annually. But that would require improved policies, incentives, regulations, and legislation, broad-based innovation and technology development, strong collaboration between industry and government, increased understanding and confidence in CCUS with the public. One of the key elements of this study, and this is really what I want to emphasize today in my introduction, was to evaluate the current state of cost and economics to derive the level of incentive required, and the underpinning policies, regulations, and legislation needed to achieve wide-scale deployment of CCUS. CCUS deployment will stall again if we focus only on a handful of large-scale demonstration projects and don't also simultaneously follow through with the necessary building blocks to achieve wider deployment. This therefore requires such joint strategic planning efforts by industry and government. With the speed and momentum of the energy transition now, the world, and the oil and gas industry in particular, cannot afford another false dawn. Gaffney Klein hosts the NPC cost assessment tool for public use, which is available on our website. We hope this tool and the learnings from the NPC CCUS study will be useful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nigel. All through your speech. Oh, I actually thought you're around London, but looks like you're in Houston. From Houston to Tokyo, wow, what a geographic span. I totally agree with you, especially in terms of a public attitude to CCS and importance of social approval and raising awareness. We are very much involved in, toppling the myths that are out there regarding CCS. And apart from, very rightly put, apart from large-scale demonstration projects, we also need to move forward strategically and jointly, because otherwise the Parisian goals are not achievable. But on the other hand, you still want to have demonstration, right? If you have at least demonstration projects, it's already a step forward, because at least this is a way to change the stakeholder attitude and the public at large attitude to this whole situation. Anna, the floor is now yours. If you could tell us a few words about how Equinor does it, how you deal with CCS and hydrogen, and how you determine the priorities between CCS and hydrogen. What is in your pipeline? What comes first? Is it CCS or hydrogen for you?
Thank you very much, Yuri, for introduction and for invitation to speak at your dialogue in SKOLKOVO. My name is Anna Korolko. I'm low carbon technology lead in Equinor. And Equinor is one of those oil and gas major companies who have announced that we will become net zero by 2050. And we have a strategy to reach it. It is based on three main pillars. They are commonly discussed already here. The first pillar is growing in the renewables. So, for example, our latest investment in the offshore wind farm, Doggerbank in UK, which is the largest offshore wind farm in the world, is of the similar range of investment as we had in our recent major oil and gas field development in Norway, Johan Sverdrup. So we are already doing that. The second pillar is energy efficiency improvement for our own operations of our platforms. The third pillar is exactly about decarbonization via establishing new value chains such as CCS and hydrogen. And within this area, we are focusing on Europe so far. We have three clusters, one in Norway, one in UK, and third cluster in northwestern continental Europe. So the status there is that for our Norwegian project, CCS project Northern Lights, we have recently got funding approval from the government to build and develop this CCS project in Norway. And we are building and installing permanent installations as we speak already there. And we have established a joint venture together with our partners Shell and Total to proceed with operations when they start. In UK, we also got positive news for all our three projects where Equinor is involved on the east coast of UK, and we are involved in decarbonization of the large industrial clusters in UK. The one is Humber, which is the largest industrial cluster in UK. The second is Teesside, and the third project is about CCS infrastructure that would serve those two clusters. So this is very positive news for us, and we will progress with those exciting projects. So the strategic fit that we see for Equinor is delivering hydrogen volumes and taking CO2 volumes from large industrial clusters and large industrial off-takers. In the continental Europe, we focus on such sectors as steel and power. And we look into both blue and green hydrogen and see that they will be complementary to each other. But of course, there are challenges, both technical and commercial. When it comes to technical challenges, we usually communicate that there are no showstoppers to build these projects, but of course, there are technical challenges connected to upscaling and cost reductions. But ultimately, this is existing technology, and it has been built before a lot in US and in different conditions such as Japanese environment. So it's a question of setting up everything together and scaling up, and this is our focus now. When it comes to commercial challenges, so this is of course the largest challenge, and it is about lack of the market, lack of certainty, lots of risk connected to demand, and lack of business models. So this is something that the projects need. They need, as it was mentioned today, the collaboration across industries, collaboration with governments in order to develop business models and policies that would make the projects economical in the longer term. Maybe the first phase would be a little bit different business models to build the market, but the second phase will be already when the market is established and different policies are made. But in general, we believe that political direction is irreversible, and we believe that we can contribute to those net zero targets that governments put as ambitions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. That was very insightful and interesting. We follow your projects really closely, and we were so happy to see that the Northern Lights has got public support and funding from the government. I'm now giving the floor to our next speaker, and I have a question to you, Mr. Selhan. In our survey, we pointed out that companies who deal with hydrogen, they do it for decarbonisation of their own sites so as to achieve their goals to curb CO2 emissions. But on the other hand, they view hydrogen as a means to diversification and goods of the future to be probably even sold globally, not just inside their own country, but elsewhere as well. So how about Total? What is the priority for the company today in terms of CCS projects and in terms of hydrogen as well? Are you looking at it as a way to decarbonize your sites, or you're looking 30 years ahead at the global hydrogen market that we all hope we're going to get? Thank you. The floor is yours.
Здравствуйте, Yuri, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I thank you for the questions and the opportunity to share our Total US CCUS experience in your prestigious school. So my apologies for not continuing to express myself in Russian. I'll just speak a few words. As a context today, as you know, we are facing a triple crisis: a health crisis, an energy crisis, and an economic crisis. This is triggering a profound transformation of the world and of the companies. And Total is, with the society, transforming itself. So we have our ambition for net zero emission in line with the society, and a philosophy in how to manage the CO2 waste cycle. So first of all, we believe that we need to reduce the emissions through energy efficiency and improving the energy mix. This is why Total is exiting the coal business and we're favoring natural gas or LNG. That has the impact of reducing by 50% the level of emissions. Then the next step, once you've done your reduction, is to store the residual CO2. You have two ways of storing the CO2. The first one is in the soil through nature-based solutions, forestry, for instance, agroforestry. The second is in the subsurface through CO2 capture, transportation, and geological sequestration, so CCS. And finally, you compensate what you cannot reduce or store. So let's focus on the CCUS. So how do we view it? It's a complex chain, very similar to LNG, in fact, with multiple emitters and one storage. Could be several storage, but we start with one storage. We capture the CO2 into fumes, separated from nitrogen and contaminants. Then when it is fit for transportation, through existing pipes or a new means of transportation, which is shipping. Let me stop a bit on that. Total experts that helped the creation of Yamal LNG icebreakers tankers, well known in Russia. I've been working on these new CO2 tankers all together with our partners and Shell in Northern Lights. Then once it is transported, you have the choice of either storing it in depleting fields or aquifers, each of them having their own specificities, or reuse it. The reuse for us is more R&D domain at the moment, unless you want to use it in the beer industry, which is, of course, possible, but not really Total business. So CCS is a tool for deep decarbonization, you said, Yuri, for residual CO2, indeed. It is small today, as it was mentioned, concentrated in North America and for EOR and oil recovery. Tomorrow it will grow, and with the growth, you will have cost reduction and marketability or commerciality. What we see today as a market response in 2030 is about 5 times the volume of the CCS industry existing on the planet today. And that growth will come mainly from Europe. At 2030, we will have Europe on par with the US in the CCS world, 40% each, approximately. And you have a shift. 60% of the overall volume of CCS will be directed for permanent storage and safe storage. So 3 drivers for that. The net zero carbon ambitions and action plans, carbon taxes, emission trading schemes. So what do we do in total? Let's focus on the North Sea as an example. Why 50% of the European CO2 emissions, available storage capacity, and the most advanced regulations and support schemes. So we try to build on our own expertise through the company, on strong R&D, and more than 20 years experience in CO2 capture, transportation, and storage in Norway, with our partners. So our portfolio of projects is centered around assets decarbonization and reuse. That's the answer of to your question, Yuri. In our refineries, our power plants. It's only refineries. It's producing low carbon hydrogen, capturing the CO2 emitted by our steam methane reformers. And we do that, for instance, in the Netherlands. And reusing our assets, that could be the transformation of depleted gas field into storages. That's what we're doing as well in the Netherlands. The second pillar is about gas decarbonization. We started in Norway, in Sleipner and Snøhvit, with the native CO2 that we capture, transport, and store in the fields. It is as well in producing low carbon electricity. That's what we do in the UK with one project there, serving 2 industrial regions. It can be as well the transformation of natural gas into low carbon H2, the blue hydrogen we talked about in our industrial assets, but as well as an energy vector. And that can be done as well by transforming water into low carbon hydrogen through renewables. So we do both, and we have projects in both. Then the last part of our portfolio is Northern Lights. That's the world's #1 and only shipping and storage industrial project. Rock blasting has started, and we'll have a startup in 2024. The investment in that project is $800 million. Was decided last year and was set by ANA, and with a very strong support by the Norwegian state. That's essential to have the support of the society and states in these projects. And then the last part is really a focus on cost reduction, which is done by scaling up effect and R&D efforts. So that's where the volumes and the decarbonization of industrial clusters, of customers of Total, help the whole chain and the whole project. So as a conclusion, I would say that in Total, we believe in collective efforts and partnerships. This is why our 2030 ambition is being built with partners and society. Our motto is more energy, less carbon, more sustainability. So with a new name as well, as Total Energies. So in 2050, we believe that our energy mix will be 20% liquids, 40% gases, including biogases and low carbon hydrogen, and 40% power. So spasiba большое for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Bruno. That was indeed very interesting to listen to what goes on in your company and to listen to your approaches. Now, I suggest that we get back to Russia And my next question is to Dmitry. All representatives of industrial and oil and gas companies speaking before you have a history of developing decarbonization projects, CCS projects, and um, hydrogen projects, all related to the ambitions of net zero emissions. It's not like that in US, but almost like that in Japan, definitely like that in Europe. It's definitely like that. It's pretty clear from the Green Deal. It's based on the achievement of climate neutrality by the year 2050. So companies are naturally incentivized to emit less of greenhouse gas, and they're looking at various models such as CCUS and hydrogen as a way forward to make this project commercially viable. So what are the challenges that you encounter as a representative of a Russian company, and to which extent Russian companies take decarbonization seriously? I mean, it's been very recently, right? Unlike Total and other companies, Russian companies joined this trend very recently. Good day, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very thankful for this opportunity to participate in this highly relevant discussion. I'd like to point out that indeed development of green energy is very important for Novatek. We almost started to assess different ways of deep decarbonization. We have all the grounds to do that, and we have all the prerequisites to do that. Thanks to our effective project management model, Novatek has the lowest cost, one of the lowest costs of gas production. We also have access to wide array of geologic reservoirs that allows us to carry out CCS projects and produce blue hydrogen, carbon capture and storage adjacent to hydrogen production. We are trying to be highly practical in approaching all tasks, so we're now looking into various potential projects. So let me share with you now how we see the commercial and technical challenges that may create hurdles on the way to decarbonization, and single out certain areas that could accelerate those projects and probably even skip over pilot stage all the way to the large scale project realization that provides great economic effect thanks to economy of scale. One of our conclusions is that events of this kind, as we're having today, and this opportunity to exchange ideas and experiences with peers and colleagues, is one of the ways and one of the solutions to push towards the right ways to realize the projects on deep decarbonization. So let me thank SKOLKOVO Business School for this opportunity. Right. So let me start by saying that every deep decarbonization project is a major industrial project that asks for major investment into infrastructure, technical infrastructure. I mean, for hydrogen production, for capture and injection of CO2. And obviously, when you look at this project, you have to follow suit of major industrial projects, and all companies look at the market first and foremost. Indeed, we are saying that low carbon products are in high demand in the market. But at this point, what we lack is understanding of whether the premium is going to be formed for low carbon products and how to make use of this and how to forecast indeed this premium for various markets, because obviously this is going to vary at different markets, and this we see as a major hurdle and a major commercial risk. So we're very actively inviting our current and potential partners as well as consumers of our low carbon products to exchange ideas and create market mechanisms for this new emergent market of low carbon products. Another thing we encountered in our project designs was that we lack clear understanding of what indeed is low carbon, what stands behind blue hydrogen or green hydrogen. More often than not, it's related to the ways to reduce CO2 emissions and ways to produce hydrogen. But if we go further, what is the exact percentage of CO2 to be captured and stored? There are some technical processes that, provided you have enough investment, can capture up to 80% of CO2 emitted when you produce hydrogen from natural gas. You can effectively and economically efficiently get rid of 80% of CO2. If we look at flue gas and processing, then technologies are getting more expensive. There are other technologies out there that allow to capture almost 100% of CO2 emissions with minimum additional incremental investment. And if we suppose that in this case we get heat and we get electricity that is required for the technological process from the renewables, then are we going to take it as a green hydrogen, and are we going to get premium for green hydrogen, or green hydrogen is only the one that you get from water through electrolysis by using renewables? In view of the fact that in any case you have zero CO2 emissions, why not call it green hydrogen? If methanol biomass methanol is used in hydrogen production, would it still be green? Would it be zero carbon? In terms of technical challenges out there, and some of the colleagues mentioned it, and I hope that many of you shares this view of the challenge. The main challenge is that we are currently lacking economically efficient options to transport and store pure hydrogen. We know that hydrogen compression, so that it can be commercially viable, happens at extreme pressures of 700 atmospheres or extreme temperatures below 253 degrees centigrade, as compared to natural grades, the natural gas liquefaction temperature, which is not as extreme. It is a challenge, and I guess a lot of companies are now combating those challenges. In conclusion of my brief intervention, I'd like to point out that another technical challenge, another not technical really, another challenge is the lack of international legislation, because we look into international markets where we see policies being introduced to decrease CO2 emissions. So in order for us to effectively realize our projects to capture the underground storage of CO2, in order to get certified and get credentials that indeed we reduce CO2 emissions to this and that amount of tons, we need to understand what are the norms and certificates we want to get, and are they same for, say, Europe and Asia. And as you mentioned, Yuri, and you were quite right in that, this is very new and it's only emergent in Russia. And should Russian legislation follow the paragon of European or other legislations? And we have to put our hands together to make this decision. We firmly believe that if companies and the society concentrates on forming the new market mechanisms for the new low carbon products market, if we create the holistic database of properties and characteristics, and we determine what is the cutoff points and what are the conditions for premiums for these products, if legislation is common across the countries and requirements are very straightforward and unified and consistent across the countries, that would be really great. And obviously we still have to, and we are still working on new technologies, and we see a lot of future in that. As related especially to storage and transportation of CO2 using various ways. That would be all. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you very much, Dmitry. The issues you raised are extremely interesting and important for Russian oil and gas companies. I think they really lack awareness, and the list of questions is for at least 4 conferences of this kind. I mean, the list of issues to be discussed is really huge. We're going to think it over. Actually, it's a good idea. Let me jot it down as an idea for next conferences. And now off to Germany. Margareta, if you could say a few words about Wintershall's opinion on how to reach the ambitious neutrality goals and the partnerships that you currently have with Russian companies, if you could amplify on that as well, what are the important things that you would like to point out?
Thanks, Yuri. Yes, and hi to everybody from Germany. Greetings to everybody from Kassel. And thanks a lot for being invited to this very interesting event. I mean, I already heard so many interesting projects, facts, and activities. Very great. So if we talk about energy transition, actually what we all see is that we face major challenges. And on the one hand side, this is the growing population, also entailing a growing demand for energy. And on the other side, we actually need to cut the greenhouse gas emissions substantially. So, and we as Wintershall Dea, we are a European leading independent gas and oil company, and we actually support the European goal of climate neutrality by 2050. And consequently, we have published our own greenhouse gas emission targets for 2030. So we want to be part of the solution. That's why we actually seek to achieve net zero by 2030 and beyond 2030 for Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. But additionally, we also invest in different technologies, of which CCS is one, and also the production of climate-friendly hydrogen, namely blue and turquoise hydrogen are the others, which we think will play a major role in the energy transition. To enable that, Wintershall Dea has established, beginning of last year, a new unit called Carbon Management and Hydrogen. With that, plus our very strong gas-weighted portfolio and our long-term experience as gas and oil producer, we not only want to actually strengthen our role in this energy transition, we actually want to also think that with our ambitions, we fit quite well to our competencies, our assets, and also our existing network. So we see hydrogen as a core component of decarbonization strategies in the EU as well as in Germany. So for us, hydrogen is not only a fuel, it's a way to store energy. It's a basic material in the chemical industry, as well. It's a component in coupling different sectors, like for instance, electricity, heat, gas networks, and also the transport sector. So large quantities of hydrogen will be required for the energy transition. And for example, in Germany, the German government assumes that the demand for climate neutral hydrogen will be between 90 and 110 terawatt hours in 2030. But neither Germany nor the EU will be able actually to satisfy the demand for hydrogen by its own domestic production and will be reliant on imports, for instance, from Russia. So Russia has given a clear commitment to its role as hydrogen provider with the publication of the energy strategy as well as the hydrogen roadmap published in October 2020. So we think that Russia is quite ready to develop various projects in the hydrogen area. In this context, I'm very glad to actually name already some bilateral initiatives between Germany and Russia. So this is all about starting hydrogen pilot projects. And for instance, this is the hydrogen initiative groups of the German-Russian Trade Chamber. This is further the Eastern Committee of German Businesses and the hydrogen working groups on the base of the German-Russian Raw Material Forum. So we believe that building and expanding German-Russian cooperation in the field of hydrogen, as well as CCS, to be a very important issue of mutual interest. So we see that Russia has enormous potential for CCS. And as part of the German-Russian cooperation, we are aiming actually to initiate projects on the issue of storing CO2, in particular in Western and Eastern Siberia. So Wintershall actually has been working with Russian partners for more than 30 years now. And this was mainly on activities like developing and producing reservoirs, as well as joint development of gas infrastructure. So we aim actually to leverage further our decades of experience and support, for instance, on the topic of blue hydrogen. And this shall happen via the production of gas as a basic material for obtaining hydrogen, as well as via taking the byproduct CO2 and injected and depleted gas reservoirs, as well as deep saline aquifers. So a key aspect for this, and at the same time, the main challenge, is the offsetting of CO2 storage in Russia against possible CO2 emission taxes in Europe to actually achieve economic effect at the end. So in other words, we need to find means of swapping or crediting CCS usage quotas in Russia against carbon taxes in the EU, and so having CO2 net neutral products in Europe. To make this possible, actually, we need to continue international dialogues and also get support from the politicians, and also to work on a common regulatory framework as a basis for international projects, which is not there yet. Elsewhere, Wintershall Dea is actually already involved in projects related to CO2 storage. For instance, in the Danish North Sea with the project Green Sand, you might heard of. But also we are kind of screening our other depleted oil and gas fields in the other areas of the North Sea for their actually suitability for CO2 storage. For us, it's very important that actually we push for a technology neutral approach that embraces all kinds of climate-friendly methods to produce hydrogen and reduce CO2 from the atmosphere. And yeah, this is kind of our goal. Besides that, the energy transition actually requires also a strong push from the governments, the energy consumers, as well as any kind of investors. That's why it's important, in our opinion, to further develop policies, to further investigate in technologies and also in the required infrastructure. Thanks a lot, Judy. Back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Margaret. And thank you very much for highlighting the role of diplomacy and international cooperation between countries. Cross-border cooperation between Russia and Germany has a long history, and indeed, it's a global issue, right? And going towards carbon neutrality, you can't be in this alone. You have to join efforts to do that. It's also clear from business logic that we need common rules that Dmitry mentioned as well. These rules have to be transparent, because this would lead to scalability of projects. Thanks once again. Professor Stern, the floor is now yours, and I'd like to pose the following question to you. So, we've heard a lot of information of various projects, and we are hearing companies saying that they're very much involved into CCS and hydrogen, and they achieve interesting results therein, both in terms of business models and in terms of technology. So, from your point of view as an independent researcher that is above this whole situation and can look at it from bird's eye. So, do you think the rate of this activity is in line with the ambitious objectives put forward by the Paris Agreement? Do you think this would be enough to reach the goals? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And hello, everybody. Thank you for the invitation to speak on this panel. I'm Jonathan Stern from the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies, which is a small think tank in Oxford, and we specialize in working on fossil fuels and particularly decarbonisation of fossil fuels. What I would like to do in these just short minutes, because we've heard from a lot of people and we already have a lot of information on the table, is to give you perhaps, unfortunately, a less optimistic picture of carbon capture and storage than perhaps some of our contributors have. So let me immediately address your question, Yuri. When I looked at the CCUS Institute's list of projects, probably these are 2019 data, we have about 40 million tons of CCUS projects in operation, of which most are enhanced oil recovery, so not exactly storage. And then we have 120 million tons of projects which are in total envisaged or in some way planned. Now, I think you said in your introduction, if I heard you right, that we would need 1.4 gigatons of CCUS capacity by 2050. But I have seen in public domain projections for net zero by 2050 that we would need between 5.5 and 7 gigatons of. So we are very far away from actually the kind of scale that we would need. And what that means to me is that if we do not see a very rapid scale up of these projects, then the world will lose confidence in CCUS as a technology which can make any kind of major contribution. What does that mean? Well, for those people involved in the oil and gas, and to some extent the coal industry as well, it means that the hydrogen that is produced will have to depend on so-called green hydrogen from renewables or possibly nuclear power. And it will mean that natural gas and other fossil fuels will really not have a future in terms of the low carbon economy, because they will have to be phased out. I mean, one of the big hopes for the future of fossil fuels is that they can be decarbonized using this technology. So let's just focus for a moment on Europe, because the decarbonization push is strongest in Europe. One of the big problems, it seems to me, for CCS in Europe is that, as we've heard from our contributors and also for our Japanese colleague, Tanaka-san, all of the CO2 has to be stored offshore. Now, this adds a level of logistical and financial complexity to the projects. There's a question about what exactly is the problem of storing CO2 onshore, as happens, I believe, in a lot of parts in North America, but there seems to be no social license for that in Europe. So what we're looking at in a lot of Europe is that many countries in Europe will not consider CCS because they're unable to access offshore reservoirs. At the moment in Europe, we have very great interest and enthusiasm in the UK, some interest and enthusiasm in the Netherlands, some possible interest in Germany, but almost nothing elsewhere. And that is a big problem unless we can find some other technology which has a social license to operate. The other big issue, which I think has come to the fore with the Northern Lights project, which is absolutely wonderful to see that given FID, is that according to our calculations, around 2/3 of the money, 2/3 of the investment has to come from the Norwegian government. Now, what that tells you is the lack of commerciality of these projects. And that is a real problem if essentially the industry is saying to governments, you have to contribute the majority of the investment for these projects. This is a big problem because governments have a lot of call on their revenues for low carbon projects. And in a sense, why should they choose CCUS if some other project has a better rate of return. Now, of course, I'm quite aware that we could have said all of this for wind and solar technologies 10 years ago, and certainly more than 10 years ago. And look how those technologies have progressed, and look how those costs have come down, so that we're now talking about this in a totally different context. Nevertheless, this is, I think, should be a particular concern for CCUS. Let me finish by making a specifically Russian comment. You know, we've heard from a lot of Russian commentators about the potential for the pyrolysis technology. And what is very advantageous about the pyrolysis technology is that it doesn't remove the need for storage, but it is much easier to store solid carbon than it is to store CO2. But what we don't see, at least what I have not heard of myself in Russia, is a very big push for investment in commercial scale pyrolysis projects. And if we are going to have confidence that those projects are really going to become a reality, then we need to see companies, Russian companies, either themselves or, as we've heard, in cooperation with international companies. We need to see those investments being made, and we need to see this quickly. You know, we can't wait 5 years to see these investments. Otherwise, I'm afraid that the credibility of these kind of technologies is going to fade, as particularly in Europe, we feel we need to move forward much more quickly. Let me stop there and thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Stern, for bringing the line to our dialogue. I wish we could continue for 4 more hours, but alas, we cannot do that. It's almost next day in some of the time zones that our speakers are in. So in the remaining time, let's make a second round among the speakers. And the question I'm posing to all the speakers is this. If we are, as Professor Stern mentioned, are too slow, and we're just happy about the small things that we currently have and the time is running out, so what is the first priority? What we lack for CCS and hydrogen to move forward at greater pace? What is the main thing? Is it carbon tax of $300 per ton of CO2? Or is it cost reduction by 4 times? Or is it global regulatory support? Or is it, say, an international global consortium on the basis of UN to... Yeah, I mean, I'm just fantasizing, and now I'm addressing you, the experienced people. Tanaka-san, if you could comment on that. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm on the party for the, I would say there are more commercial challenges than technical challenges facing large-scale development of CCS and hydrogen. I believe much of the technology is already in existence and proven, but the regulatory and policy incentives are not there. So, but I think state governments have an important role to play in kickstarting this CCS and giving it a fair chance to move ahead. And so I think in defense of the Norwegian government, I would say the Norwegian government is making an investment, and they are trying and they have some confidence of kickstarting a CCS industry, a CO2 storage industry. So I have very high. I'm rather optimistic that their efforts will succeed, and people will be able to realize the potential that CCS has. So yes, that's about it for my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanaka-san. And let's keep going. And Mr. Karapetov, what do you think we're lacking? Thank you, Yuri. Thank you for this question. My colleagues on the call were very concise and precise in voicing it. We indeed are not constrained by technology. Efficiency improvements in the Russian industry can be achieved through further localization. And we've been discussing it at this event today. And we obviously lack a regulatory basis and stimuli to invest into this kind of projects, and also clear-cut rules and straightforward rules and ways to return on these investments. Otherwise, good technologies aside and great commercial potential aside, the scaling of these projects would be impossible in the territory of the Russian Federation. Thank you, Artyom. Nigel? What we lack, do you think?
What do we lack? That's a great question. There's certainly some additional hurdles to overcome. In terms of getting to scale for CCUS, Professor Stern, brought up, indeed, that is the really important aspect for CCUS to be a climate change mitigation technology, the scale that it needs to achieve by mid-century. And that is exactly why the US NPC study really was initiated. How do we move from the capital grants, the operating subsidies, loan guarantees that are provided to demonstration projects today, to a more stable market mechanism based system in the future? There is an interim step. The interim step that the US is now taking is by providing tax credits and a large market mechanism purely for CCUS. That is the support mechanism that underpinned renewables here in the United States. For CCUS, we just have a production tax credit called 45Q today. That really just takes into account operating costs. We're also speaking to the government about putting in place an investment tax credit. The combination of those two things, investment for capital cost, production tax credit for operating cost, really helps wind and solar deployment. The other thing that wind and solar deployment got was standards and mandates for a certain level of deployment, and almost like a public procurement guarantee for their deployment as well. So those three things is a bit of a trifecta, and I think that's the next step that countries will have to take in order to move from demonstration to sector-specific deployment before we can all see and rely on a carbon price being high enough to support wide-scale deployment with technology cost reduction in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nigel. Anna, over to you. So what we lack from your point of view to accelerate and be best and, go forward?
If I may, I would like to say a few words about Northern Lights project as an answer to Professor Stern. As much as I appreciate the incredible scale of how much CCS would be needed for us to reach net zero by 2050, we should also appreciate that Northern Lights is a first of a kind project. And in addition, it is a ship-based, so it is a really expensive project, and we believe that scaling up would help with cost reduction. And back to your question, Yuri, about what is lacking in my opinion, it is, well, the firmness of the government in the direction of towards this net zero goal, because if the governments want to reach that, it's gonna be costly, and probably some unpopular decisions will have to be made, and the government needs to stay firm on that direction so that investors are not left double guessing.
Right, right here, I totally get you. Forgot to point out from what Nigel mentioned. Indeed, renewables went down in cost like 9 times in what, 10 years, right? And this is due to all kinds of state support and all the mechanisms that you alluded to, Nigel. And it paved the way, so to speak, to the accelerated scaling of renewable projects all over the world. And we indeed lack something like that for CCUS and for hydrogen alike. Should we have the attitude the way it was for solar panels and wind turbines, it probably would have been much easier. Long-term and clear-cut support would have allowed us to achieve commercialization zone. So it's kind of vicious circle at this point. I think you would agree. You have to turn it into virtuous circle, basically, and you can't just wait and sit back and relax and wait when something happens on its own. And you know, energy kept working like that for 2 centuries. Why would we expect it to cease doing the way it's used to all of a sudden? And we have to go from one paradigm to a next paradigm, but you really have to have a quantum leap, a push to go from one paradigm to the other. And I now give the floor to our next speaker. What do you think we're lacking, Bruno, to accelerate in this direction?
Well, thank you, Yuri. I subscribe. We need a quantum leap to accelerate. And that can be done through a stick and carrot mechanism. And you have that mechanism already in place in several countries around the world, and particularly in Europe. So we talked about Norway, the carrot being a big support given by the Norwegian state to Northern Lights, but as well the commercial risk and investment risk taken by the partners, the 3 partners. That's part of the carrot. The stick being in Norway, the increase of a carbon tax to about $220 per ton in 2030. At these levels, CCS chains are profitable. Another example would be in the Netherlands. Netherlands, the political coalition is targeting a carbon tax, including the European Trading Scheme, at 125 euros per ton in 2030. So that's the stick. And the carrot is a very well engineered subsidy mechanism in order to help the industries to decarbonize. So I would add to that, because that's a startup, a kind of a kickstarting mechanism, that what we are aiming at in Total is a commercial CCS. And that commercial CCS, as you mentioned as well, will come from added value, was mentioned by as well Novatec. And it's a very good analysis. It's the added value in the low carbon products that will give the incentive to invest into decarbonization. And CCS is one of the tools for decarbonization. It's not the only one, but it's a deep decarbonization tool once you switch to some renewables, from coal to natural gas, etc. And then you have CCS, and for some industries, you have as well a low carbon hydrogen. So it's a chain moving to commercialization. I think the ingredients are there. A huge amount of money is being given in Europe thanks to the Green Deal and thanks to national states regulations. And projects are there. There is a market response. Still small, by International Energy Agency standards or requirements, but it's 5 times today of what is existing in 2020. For this kind of a large industrial industry, it's major. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Bruno. Dmitry, so if you could voice your point of view as a representative of a Russian company, what do you lack in Russian projects to move forward? I guess my answer is not necessarily as narrow as specialized in the Russian market. I think it's equally important for the global market because I mean it's universal for our projects and global projects. Despite the fact that many of the speakers mentioned that that the technology is already proven, I still believe that we have this syndrome of initial stage in place. Let me put this way: Uh, the um, the awareness, the impetus coming from various businesses and the government is obviously not enough. We're seeing the momentum, but it's pretty unique, and then what we lack is time. I think we lack time to overcome the syndrome of being in the initial stage and understanding what's more important, the legislative base gaps as a way to realize this project, or the market mechanisms. Well, both are important indeed. Most importantly, all participants to this discussion, they see the challenges and they join their effort in overcoming those, and hopefully this would lead to finding the solutions to all the issues that were mentioned, and that would accelerate this whole process of CCS implementation, the way we indeed saw for renewables and the way we saw earlier for LNG. Remember, we actually had to overcome same challenges for LNG. We just lack time. So this is our main hurdle, I would say. Right, you are. Absolutely. Very, very straightforward and relevant answer. Indeed, we lack time to make it happen. All the things mentioned above. Should we have like 50 years or 100 years and a different planet? That would be much easier. Right. Over to you, Margaret. What do you think is the most important thing that is lacking currently?
I mean, if we look at CCS, I think I totally agree to Mr. Tanaka. So technically, this is already happening globally. I mean, Northern Lights is quite far, and we have other projects in the Norwegian Sea which are already doing CCS, also in the US or Canadian areas. So this is already taking place. But I think for some of the European assets, also looking at the Dutch sector, the monitoring requirements are not yet clear. So this is different from the Japanese actually activities where the monitoring requirements are quite set already and everything is clear also to those who are trying to get actually CCS established. So this is one thing. On the other hand, I think this is not really, let's say, a global or European answer that you can give on CCS, as especially in Germany, CCS is so much controversially discussed activity that this is really a country-specific discussion that we have to take here. So, and this is also, for my opinion, the reason why in countries where the politicians and the public is backing those projects, like in Norway, in the Netherlands and the UK, those CCS activities are actually quite mature already. If you look on hydrogen, there I have to comment that the technology regarding turquoise hydrogen in the sense of methane process is quite quickly progressing. So we actually, as Wintershaldea, would like to realize some project on turquoise hydrogen in the very near future. So, and we also seek into further cooperation with the institutes in Russia, actually. So this is totally on our agenda. Thanks, Yuri.
Thank you, Margaret. Over to you, Professor Stern. If you could once again finalize our discussion, add some bit of pessimism to our discussion once again.
I'm not sure I can finalize our discussion, but I think most of what I was going to say has already been said. Clearly, a carbon tax and clearly a carbon tax at 150, 200 euros a ton would be a major assistance to the but let me just warn that with a carbon tax at that level, a lot of other technologies also become much more competitive, and with the enthusiasm that the European Commission has for green hydrogen, I'm not sure that with a carbon tax at that level, CCS necessarily gets a great deal of priority. Let me just finish by saying, if I sounded somehow critical of Northern Lights, that wasn't my intention. The problem is that where would we be in Europe with CCS if we didn't have the Norwegian government and Equinor? We would be nowhere. Basically, the big push has come from Norway, but we can't all rely on Norway. we have to find some means of mobilizing government support from certainly the UK, possibly the Netherlands, and hopefully, despite Margaretta's concerns, maybe even one day from Germany. But basically, we have to get a lot more government support and quickly, so that we start these projects and then we get the cost reduction that we all hope, the learnings from other technologies. So really, I support what everybody has said, but I'd better stop there because I think we may now be a little tight on time. Thank you, Yuri.
Thank you very much, Professor Stern. Thank you to all of you colleagues. It's been really exciting and interesting. It's great that I've been listening, and sorry for taking time away from you with my interventions. I'd like to point out in closing down that global energy sector that we need by the year 2050 is going to be totally different. It's going to be very much not like the one we have today. And to go from point A to point B of 2050 is not an easy thing. There's no easy way forward to do it. So we definitely need to converge on an idea between stakeholders and governments. If we don't have simple decisions, well, we have to take complex decisions. One aspect is high carbon tax, but it's not a panacea, right? And if we do not treat it as a way, as a whip, as something imposed on us to strangle the economy, like in Brazil, they may believe that it's because of the evil Americans, and the Americans may think that it's because of evil Chinese, and this ping pong of accusations and blame game. Well, in this way, it would be difficult to take our decisions. We need to understand how, in the time horizon of 30 years, the energy sector and the global environment is going to change, and we do it not because of our own whim, not because we want to build a new system, woke up once again and decided to do it, because we want to combat the climate change challenge, and hence we need long-term modeling that would allow to convince the decision makers that unless people pay this carbon tax today, and unless they don't provide us with the tax break today, we'll have to do something different and at larger scale in 30 years. And the year 2020 is a great signal for all of us. I doubt that people would be happy to keep living in the world of global catastrophe. And how many more of black swans like that are hidden behind the curtains of climate change is unknown, and we try not to look at that at all, but we should. And I think it's something that we need to look at attentively. Thank you very much for sharing your experience, the expertise, the projects. Thank you for sharing all this information, and we'll be happy to see you at our further events from SKOLKOVO Business School, and I invite you to join the final session. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Moscow School of Management SKOLKOVO is launching the Energy Transition 4.0 educational program. Many countries have sprung into action with the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, that is, introduced emission taxes, launched national CO2 emissions trading schemes. Consumers and investors are making new demands and driving businesses to change. What is energy transition, and how does it affect regions and businesses in Russia and other resource-producing countries? What is the future of oil, coal, gas, and electricity? How do traditional industry actors maintain their competitive positions? Students will get answers to these questions from leading experts and industry representatives in a convenient online format. 4 modules with lectures, online sessions, and interactive tasks. The effective presence thanks to the virtual educational classroom and a convenient personal account in the Canvas learning management system. For corporate executives and public authorities involved in risk management, strategic and investment decision-making process, and export-oriented industries. The program completion certificate will be provided. For more information about the program, please scan the QR code.